You don't get a second chance at 600 knots. In the world of modern naval warfare, there's no warning shot, only reaction time. On a quiet April morning in 2025, the USS Harry S. Truman sailed steadily through the Red Sea, part of a routine patrol. Above, Super Hornets traced lazy arcs across the sky. Below deck, sailors carried out their daily tasks. It was business as usual until 0724. Suddenly, radar screens lit up. Alarms howled. Multiple threats inbound. Low, fast, coordinated. But the ship didn't flinch. No panic. No confusion. Just swift, practiced precision. In seconds, the Truman shifted from routine to combat mode. A transformation born not of instinct, but of endless training and unbreakable discipline. When war arrives without warning, would you rather have nerves of steel or systems drilled into perfection? Let us know in the comments, because what happened next wasn't just defense, it was a masterclass in control. The Red Sea was a mirror that morning, still, silent, stretching to the horizon under a soft April sun. The USS Harry S. Truman cut across the waters with a deliberate grace, her hull gleaming in the light, her crew going about the rhythms of daily life aboard a carrier. Above the deck, F-A-18 Super Hornets carved lazy arcs across the sky, pilots logging routine patrol hours. Below, engineers checked systems, ordnance crews inventoried munitions, and sailors moved with the steady heartbeat of a ship at peace. There was no sense of urgency, no hint that within minutes the world around them would ignite. At precisely 0724 a.m., that fragile calm shattered. Inside the Combat Information Center, radar screens suddenly pulsed with life. Multiple blips, Vakisha, fast, low, aggressive, flashed into existence all at once. To the untrained eye, it would have looked like static, a momentary glitch. But to the crew, honed by endless drills, it was unmistakable. Inbound hostiles. Without hesitation, the ship moved. Klaxons wailed across the decks, their mechanical cries slicing through the calm. Sailors sprinted for battle stations, not in panic, but in perfect synchronization. Every corridor echoed with the sound of boots hitting steel. Bulkhead doors slammed shut, locking down the ship into combat compartments. Communications channels flooded with clear, concise orders, each voice clipped and composed. Above deck, flight crews scrambled. Alert 5 Hornets were prepped to launch. Steam hissed from the catapults as deck crews rushed into position, loading missiles and fueling jets with a speed that only practice, endless, grueling practice, could produce. There was no shouting, no confusion, only precision. Inside the CIC, threat classification unfolded like a machine operating at full tilt. Contacts were plotted, vectors calculated, engagement zones defined. Officers barked out distances, altitudes, speeds, and defense layers came alive. Electronic warfare teams initiated jamming protocols. The Aegis system began locking onto threats with cold efficiency, selecting interception sequences without human hesitation. Even the ship herself seemed to shift personality, from a floating city into a weapon of war. On nearby destroyers and cruisers, missile tubes opened with sharp mechanical hisses. SM-2 interceptors and ESSMs armed themselves for launch, ready to meet the incoming storm. The SeaWiz CIWS turrets spun up, tracking potential leakers with their whirring mechanical gaze, ready to unleash walls of titanium at a moment's notice. This transformation wasn't reaction, it was design. It wasn't instinct, it was execution. Where any lesser force might have faltered, confused by the sheer speed of unfolding danger, Truman's crew acted like a single, massive organism. Every cell knew its role, every heartbeat synchronized to the rhythm of battle. The enemy hadn't just launched missiles that morning. They had pulled the pin on a machine that didn't panic. It performed. If the alarm had shattered the ship's stillness, the reaction that followed reassembled it, but into something sharper, faster, deadlier. Within the Combat Information Center, the heart of the Truman's battle brain, a silent storm unfolded. Operators, seated at their consoles, moved with mechanical speed, hands dancing over keyboards and touchscreens. Each new incoming contact wasn't chaos. It was a variable to be sorted, classified, neutralized. Vectors and threat matrices filled the screens, rapidly color-coded and ranked by priority. The Aegis combat system roared to life. Targets were assigned firing solutions automatically, feeding real-time data to missile systems standing ready on nearby escorts. There was no shouting here, no desperate guesses, only precision, the kind that only thousands of simulations could forge. Across the ship's decks and passageways, teams moved like clockwork. Electronic warfare officers flooded the electromagnetic spectrum with interference, throwing up jamming fields meant to blind enemy guidance systems. In the weapons bays, missile techs confirmed loadouts, rearmed launchers, and fed fresh targeting data into guidance computers. Not a single step wasted, not a single action out of place. Above deck, ordnance crews readied catapults with breathtaking efficiency. Hornets armed with live ordnance rolled into position without hesitation, wings heavy with missiles. Steam vents hissed as launch crews readied the catapults, hydraulic arms tense and quivering, poised for the order to launch. Meanwhile, the escort ships surrounding the Truman turned outward like a shield wall forming an ancient battle. Ticonderoga-class cruisers and Arleigh Burke destroyers swung into their firing positions. Vertical Launch System VLS hatches clanged open in sequence, revealing the sleek warheads of SM-2 and ESSM missiles, each one primed to punch into the incoming storm. The defensive posture was layered, deliberate, absolute. Outer-range engagements were assigned to long-range interceptors, SM-2s that would chase cruise missiles through the upper atmosphere. Mid-range threats would be shredded by evolved Sea Sparrow missiles flying in synchronized kill pairs. Anything that slipped through, skimming low over the waves, would be met by the whirring, snarling fury of the Phalanx CIWs, an impenetrable wall of gunfire waiting just beyond the skin of the carrier. And through it all, every system, every operator, every gunner knew their place. There was no delay in activation, no gap between detection and response. No hesitation when split-second decisions meant life or death. The USS Harry S. Truman was not merely reacting to an attack. She was unfolding a defense so layered, so precisely synchronized that it blurred the line between human instinct and mechanical inevitability. It wasn't the number of missiles they had in the tubes that mattered. It was how every hand, every mind, every trigger converged into a unified will. Defend the ship. Repel the attack. Leave nothing to chance. At that moment, the Truman wasn't just a carrier. She was a symphony of steel, fire, and human precision. And she was just getting started. Pressure does strange things to people. It warps judgment. It tightens the chest. It freezes action. But aboard the USS Harry S. Truman that morning under the shadow of incoming death, it did something else entirely. It sharpened focus. On the bridge, officers moved with a crispness that bordered on eerie. Communications were clipped, efficient, void of emotion. Command decisions flowed like electricity through copper, fast, precise, unburdened by fear. Orders for electronic countermeasures, for missile launch authorization, for flight deck readiness were issued in sequence without hesitation. Down in the engine rooms, in the weapons bays, in radar rooms buried deep within the ship's armored heart, sailors executed their drills with mechanical certainty, no second guessing, no wasted breath. Every action was a link in a chain of survival, and every link held firm. Above the deck, flight crews operated in a ballet of urgency. Red shirts hustled bombs and missiles to waiting hornets, while yellow shirts directed aircraft into launch positions with sweeping, practiced motions. The deck itself thrummed with tension, but not a single hand trembled. Not a single movement betrayed fear. Even as the first wave of enemy missiles hurtled closer, visible now as angry slashes across the sky, there was no eruption of chaos. There was only the tightening of the machine. Every muscle and mind focused into a single sharpened point. And at the tip of that spear were the pilots, Strapped into cockpits already humming with power, the fighter jocks didn't need rallying cries or stirring speeches. They needed only the terse words crackling over their comms. Scramble, go hot! Catapults hissed, jet engines roared. Within seconds, FA-18 Super Hornets were airborne, afterburners punching the morning sky with searing blue light. In the air, the pilots didn't hesitate. Missile locks snapped onto hostile drones. AIM-120 AMRAAMs leapt from rails and streaked out like thunderbolts. There was no dramatic pause, no cinematic showdown. It was clinical. A fast, brutal severing of threats before they could ever reach striking distance. Meanwhile, in the corridors of the ship, away from the roar of jets and missiles, the sailors manning defense systems continued their work with the same unwavering discipline. One hand adjusted radar gain, another recalibrated jamming frequencies. A gunnery officer leaned into his headset, tracking SeaWiz turrets as they scanned for targets breaking through the upper layers. Everyone knew the stakes. Everyone understood that one mistake, one lapse, could cost them the ship, their comrades, their own lives. But nobody blinked. Because on the Truman, courage wasn't about bravado. It was about control, about doing the job perfectly when everything around you threatened to tear itself apart. In the end, that was the real weapon deployed that day. Not missiles or missiles alone, but the iron will of a crew who refused to be rattled, who fought with their minds as fiercely as with their machines. The enemy had gambled on fear. They found only resolve. The first enemy missile never stood a chance. Before it could even enter the Truman's outer defense perimeter, a pair of SM-2 interceptors punched skyward from a nearby destroyer, trailing fire and thunder. At Mach speeds, the defensive missiles sliced through the thin Red Sea air, locking onto their targets with ruthless precision. Seconds later, a bloom of light erupted high above the horizon, hostile contact neutralized. But the attack hadn't come as a single shot. It came in waves from multiple angles, intended to saturate defenses and slip a dagger through the cracks. The enemy underestimated the layers they were up against. Mid-range threats, cruise missiles flying lower hugging the wave tops, were next. ESSMs leapt from vertical launch cells, spiraling toward their marks. In coordinated pairs, they sliced across the sea, weaving a death net that shredded incoming threats before they could close within lethal range. Explosions dotted the skies, each a testimony to a missile intercepted, an attack denied. Yet even then, redundancy was the rule. One drone, riding just meters above the surface, evaded initial radar sweeps. Skimming the water, it darted closer, a ghost against the ocean's glare. But the SeaWiz didn't miss what human eyes might. The Phalanx CIWs, already spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, locked on. A heartbeat later, its Vulcan cannon erupted in a deafening roar. A wall of depleted uranium rounds stitched the air, and the drone disintegrated in a burst of shattered metal and shredded electronics, never getting within 1,000 yards of the carrier. Above, Super Hornets expanded their defensive umbrella. Pilots scanned for any leaks. No hesitation, no assumptions. When a loitering munition dared approach from an unseen vector, it met a swift, unflinching response. A Fox 3 call-out, an AMRAAM launched, and another flash of victory in the brightening sky. All told, 18 hostile projectiles had been fired against the Truman and her escorts. 18 threats, each designed to cripple, to kill, to humiliate. None made it through. 9 were destroyed at long range by SM-2 and ESSM interceptors. 3 were ripped apart by SeaWiz turrets before they could sniff the fleet. The rest either detonated harmlessly in the sky or were intercepted mid-flight by coordinated fighter cover. Not a single missile, not a single drone crossed the final threshold to impact. The Truman hadn't just survived the assault. She had dissected it, piece by piece, layer by layer, without a scratch. And all of it, from first radar blip to final kill confirmation, had unfolded in less than 5 minutes. 5 minutes where preparation, discipline, and relentless drilling collided with real-world violence. and triumphed. There were no lucky breaks, no close calls framed as miracles. There was only performance. Cold, clean, perfect. For the Houthis, it was supposed to be a message of defiance. For the world watching, it became something else entirely, a demonstration of unshakable power at sea. The Houthis hadn't simply failed in their attack. They had miscalculated the very nature of their opponent. They had expected reaction, scrambling, confusion, maybe a few missiles fired in desperation. What they encountered instead was orchestration, a defense so layered, so ruthless in its efficiency, that their carefully plotted assault was dismantled before it could even threaten the carrier's outer skin. But the real message wasn't in the interception numbers. It wasn't just in the absence of damage or the pristine decks of the USS Harry S. Truman glinting under the Red Sea sun. It was in the cold, silent certainty of what would happen next. Because the Truman's survival wasn't the end of the engagement. It was only the beginning of a response the enemy would not be able to predict, outrun, or survive. From the moment the last hostile contact was wiped from the skies, retaliation was already in motion. Target packets were loaded. Flight crews began readying ordnance, not in chaos, but in deliberate, methodical preparation. Every action flowed with the same precision that had defended the ship minutes earlier, now turned outward. Across the fleet, the rules of engagement shifted like a blade being unsheathed. No longer reactive, no longer restrained. The Truman strike group was now hunting. What the Houthis had triggered wasn't a skirmish, it was a doctrine shift, a hard, unspoken decree written in steel and fire. Attacks against U.S. forces would no longer be tolerated as isolated incidents. Every shot would be answered. Every launch would be met with devastating counterpunches. This was the real cost of their gamble. The Houthis had aimed to humiliate a superpower, to splash headlines across the world, to rally their cause through a show of defiance. Instead, they revealed their launch points, they exposed their networks, they painted targets onto every asset they hoped to hide. And the Truman, backed by her escorts and bolstered by new orders, was ready to answer. Not with press releases or diplomatic protests, but with a barrage of precision firepower that would erase the enemy's footprints from the map. On the open water, surrounded by nothing but endless blue, the carrier stood unbroken, an immovable fortress, poised for war. And somewhere in the hills of western Yemen, where commanders once celebrated the launching of missiles, there would soon be only silence. The enemy had spoken first. The United States Navy would ensure they would not speak again, at least not from the same position. Because on that April morning, it wasn't just a battle that was fought and won, it was a statement made in the clearest terms possible. Attack the fleet and you will face not panic, but precision, not fear, but fury. And precision, when wielded by steel nerves and relentless preparation, leaves nothing but echoes behind. The Red Sea that morning was a silent witness. Not to a victory born of chance, but to a demonstration of unstoppable will. The USS Harry S. Truman and her battle group didn't just survive an attack. They dismantled it, piece by piece, with the kind of cold precision that only relentless preparation and unbreakable discipline can forge. No hesitation, no mercy, just execution, flawless and final. What the enemy intended as a bold statement became their own undoing, erased not with fanfare, but with fire and silence. Because aboard a U.S. carrier, survival isn't hoped for. It's engineered. And in a world where conflict strikes without warning, the side that stays calm under fire wins. Now, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your country or city in the comments below, and let's see how far this fleet sails across the world. If you value real-world military stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More battles, more breakdowns are just over the horizon. Stay sharp, stay ready, because in the next fight, calm won't just be power, it'll be survival.